Hey, I'm Helene Cohen, along with my co host, Fede Pacheco, and we're super excited to be back in this new year with the latest episode of No Slides Attached. I bet you're going to be excited about what we have manufactured for you today.
Hi, Helene. Hey, everyone. I am so glad that the puns are finally becoming contagious. I really love what you did there because that's right. Today's episode is on manufacturing as we continue our season of industries. And we're excited to talk about the impact that AI is having in this industry to prepare for. I read a little bit about this, about the industrial metaverse.
Well, that sounds kind of cool. What's the industrial metaverse?
I had the same question, Helene, actually, because I thought that sounded kind of cool. We when I was looking into the Microsoft industry clouds, and it said that we had to embrace this new design and manufacturing paradigms to prepare for the industrial metaverse. And I was like, we cannot show up to this manufacturing conversation without knowing what it is. Then I remember a few episodes ago, Dr. Henry Chesbrough taught us about this prompt he uses to ask, in very simple terms, how would you explain complex or intimidating concept to a 5-year-old. Do you want to see what it told me about the industrial metaverse?
Yeah, for sure.
So it said, imagine you have a toy factory in your room. And now you're having a special video game where you can see and control everything in this toy factory. You can see the machines, the workers, and even the toys being made. This video game helps you make sure everything is working perfectly and you can fix problems even before they happen. So that sounds a lot like AI, right? And that is what the industrial metaverse is. It's like for grown-ups who work in real factories. Super cool way to make sure everything runs smoothly and it makes the best toys or products possible. So it was a really cool analogy overall.
In other words, you're talking about like a digital space where the physical and virtual worlds come together to improve manufacturing processes.
Pretty much.
Yeah. But the example for the 5-year-old makes it so much more easy to understand. Let's see what our guest has to say about this today. We have Rescale with us, and Rescale is a leader in the space and a member of Microsoft's Cloud for Manufacturing. They have an unprecedented level of innovation in the space, and we're super lucky to learn from their experience today.
That's right. Joining us from Rescale is Derek McCoy. He's a senior executive at the company and has steered the enterprise, public sector, and global OEM business units through Series A to Series D stages. Prior to Rescale, Derek has amassed decades of experience at top-tier enterprise software firms like HP and IBM. So he has tons of learnings. I'm really curious what you have to share with us today, Derek. Welcome to No Slides Attached.
Yeah, thank you both for having me. I'm excited to get into the conversation, and what you guys are doing is pretty incredible, and it gets a lot of good information out to the market. So I'm excited to talk today.
Awesome. So we're going to get started. And we've asked all of our guests this one question. What is one prompt you can't live without these days? It can be personal or it can be work related.
Yeah. So one of the things that I like to do, given the fact that we work a lot within these manufacturing companies as well as public sector and so forth, I like to take massive documents, which it's great that a lot of people put a lot of effort into creating comprehensive documents, but I try to ask the prompt of what has not been explored in the industry based on the policy that's here. So I try to find different ideas and unique things that are unexplored within these. So oftentimes when we're talking about policy documentation or directional, transformation initiatives that companies have, you want to understand where they're not focused right now, because that gives you two things. One, where should you be looking to focus in the long term? And then in the short term, it can kind of tell you where they're honing in on things and what's not important to them right now. So that's kind of something outside the box I try to use.
Yeah, because you hear so much about content summarization or analysis, or we
Mhm.
were just doing simplification, but also it can tell you what's not there. Therefore, it's either white space, something we're overlooking, or something that is maybe not important, right? From the get go. And going back, Derek, to that co-pilot metaphor that I gave you on the industrial metaverse, you might consider it very simple to all the cool and complex things you do and the complex problems you solve. But what is, how do we connect this and the future of manufacturing with your vision at Rescale, that grown-up style, everyday job you guys have, and you're thriving at it in the era of AI?
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing that we think about there is there's a lot of companies that are approaching this problem. You have Siemens doing a lot of digital manufacturing, you have Omniverse with NVIDIA, and you can kind of go down the list. What we look at Rescale is where do we need to be a good steward of data, of computing, and of engineering in order to really funnel that rich data set into the industrial metaverse so they can make applicable decisions in real time? And are they working off the most accurate data? Are they able to do more modeling and simulation in order to make decisive choices as they look at their manufacturing process or products and so forth? So essentially, where we're leaning in and saying, this is coming. And we understand that there's going to be VR, there's going to be a number of other components there, and there's going to be this digital world people are looking at. We are looking to lean in with our product to say, all right, in order to do that, you need to be able to have the right foundational layer for engineering and researchers to be able to do the work they do. So then when you get up the chain and you're going into methods analysis, or you're going even further to make a business decision, people are working off the right set of data and a comprehensive set of data. They know all the variables that are out there and how those are going to affect their product development, essentially.
Yeah, super interesting. So one of my favorite questions is, and this is how I'm learning throughout our podcast as well, is, what are some of the key trends that you're seeing in the industry, like in the last 12 months?
Yeah. So a big trend that we're seeing across the board is that people want to go to less physical testing and more digital testing. And that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. There's certain organizations that put a percentage to that. They say, hey, we want to be able to do 50% more digital testing, or they say, we want to do little to no physical testing. They try to set their aspirations as to what they can accomplish. And so that's a huge trend that we're seeing, which means that they have to, again, bring in the technology ecosystem in order to support that. And I liken it to the way that certain companies have gone from a traditional software model to a SaaS model, where they're rolling out to Wall Street. And if they go to a SaaS model that's consumption based, it's really hard to be able to forecast out the usage and the growth and the financials of your company. So they need to set that foundational layer, start moving their customers over to subscription and so forth. Well, I see that same thing happening in the manufacturing space, where they say, all right, well, there's a lot of policy, there's a lot of different components and regulation in our industry. So in order to do that, we have to have a strong ecosystem of technologies that make us confident that if we start doing more digital testing, then when we put a car on the road, or we put some kind of component an aircraft, that we're confident and we have ways to monitor exactly what we did in order to verify that this was going to be a safe product. So I think in general, there's a lot of building right now in terms of where they're going. And that trend seems to be universal, that people are looking to do more digitally than physically, because there's a significant cost reduction and there's just a broader way to look at things. You can look at more optionality, you could do more with it, you can look at a broader range of variables, and it's not a finite thing where you are doing a crash test or something along those lines.
Yeah, of course. Think about speed, think about scale, think about, you're saying, simulations. It's really encouraging. Yet at the same time, I think this ties really well with our next question, which is about security. Because how do we put the same fence we put on around physical products and physical tools that we use? How do we take that to the industrial metaverse, if I may continue with that term? I'm sure it's critical, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on and how are you seeing this become such a crucial part of what you do?
Yes, it certainly is. And so the framework that we've always worked on is that we would always take security as number one. We know that cloud in general can sometimes have this cloud over it, or, not to put another cloud on it, this kind of like gray cloud over it, where people aren't sure exactly how it all functions. It's a little bit of a black box right now in terms of knowledge and information. The information and knowledge has grown, and there is plenty plenty of access to resources out there, but it's an adoption phase. And so what we've done is we've made sure that we stay within the highest restrictions of those different components. So whether that be FedRAMP moderate through government, IL5, which we're in process right now, ITAR, SOC 2 compliance, and so forth. That's how we leverage our approach in terms of if we set the bar very high that we're always going to be able to support organizations like the government, usually the other components will take care of itself. And then naturally we work within our customers to understand, do we need to build out more robustness? But it does take the community of tech companies working cohesively to come up with those strategies, to come up with those barriers and those fences in order to make sure that we're all aligned, that we have another network of vendors and so forth that we can leverage. So you have a lot of VPN companies out there, you have data logging companies. Are they taking the right practices into their business so that way they're repeatable when we build software stacks for companies? And so I do think taking that security first approach is really something that needs to be considered. And there's some trade-offs that happen in that. So, making sure that we stay on the leading edge of those things is important, because one of the benefits of cloud is the speed and the accessibility to the latest and greatest hardware, to the latest and greatest software, and so forth. But you can take performance hits if you don't set it up correctly. So I think, again, coming together as a community, understanding what's in the ecosystem, and making sure you're partnering with those companies and you're pushing them based on the new regulations that are out, the new policies that are out, and so forth, and making sure they're staying on the cutting edge with you.
Well, yeah, we love that you're putting security first, and I love the community aspect and that you're able to pull others in with you just because of, where you stand in terms of, being in the manufacturing play. So that's awesome. What is one milestone that you've seen the industry achieve, since the rise of AI? Maybe something that you didn't think was possible before, and now you're seeing, as a trend.
Yeah. So one of the big trends that I think is getting touched upon now is they're trying to take, 100 years of documentation and be able to leverage, a lot of great engineering and a lot of development that was way before its time, and then give that back to new people. And when we think about advancing our workforce and we think about advancing our product, it's really hard to just enable somebody. Somebody comes into a company, or we're changing the way that we do things. They need to have access to information. And so being able to build a large language model against 100 years of documentation, we didn't see that happening a couple of years ago. Whereas now, if somebody wants to adopt a new technology, it's possible. Before it was, you have to bring consultants in, or you have to have a whole plan. And it's almost a one-way door that if you make this decision, it's an expensive one and you're ripping and replacing an entire system, whatever that might be. Now it's, hey, we actually have the baseline of information and resources to make this transition successful for all of our employees. We can adopt new techniques. We can adopt new strategies that previously were not possible. So I think the ability to take in years of data and then also be able to actually collaborate on it, like build a large language model for a manufacturing company where somebody's in one department versus another, but they both can leverage and kind of cross-pollinate on learnings, is something that's really powerful. Where historically, manufacturing organizations have been siloed because there's been acquisitions, there's been spinoffs, there have been just new business units started. And that is really great for growth. But at the same time, it creates barriers for the business to expand or to be able to benefit from each other's work. And so I think that's something that has been a milestone that has hit or is being hit by most organizations right now.
I think this strongly relates to case studies that we've seen and other stories that we've read, where it's at the individual level where you see that first, progression of how really generative AI has enabled the individual at an organization to achieve more. Now, when we think about longer term, as AI becomes less of a point solution and more of like at the core of organizations, what are the things that you expect to be solving, a few months or maybe a year from now that it hasn't solved yet, but you feel like really encouraged about it?
Yeah, so I think that one big thing in their space rescales in where we're supporting a lot of modeling and simulation, physics-based simulation, large physics models are going to develop over time. Physics is a little bit different than a large language model because physics can be unstable. And when you're trying to build a large physics model, there needs to be a lot of data and there's a lot of synthetic data that needs to be built. So basically somebody has to go out there, create this idea, and then run multiple different scenarios in order to have a baseline of how things are supposed to appropriately act. And I think that's something that will be figured out over time. And that means that you're taking metadata, you're taking historical data, you're gonna have to bring that in and say, if I'm designing this component, an antenna or a car or whatever that is, whatever you're manufacturing, how is that applicable from what I've done in the past, or how's that applicable how it's going to work in the real world? And so you build these neural nets around it today, and that speeds it up significantly. But the idea is that over time you'd be able to go in and train this model in order to understand even more comprehensively. And then a second component that I think needs to still be solved a little bit for everybody across AI is that understanding how to, one, solve the historical data problem. How do you sift through all this data? How do you parse through it? How do you make sure that it's all tagged the right way and that it's usable? And then how do you plan forward? So they're trying to solve two problems at once right now. It's, hey, we're here, we're doing this, so we need to have a plan moving forward. But they also need to solve the historical problem right now. So as companies are doing this, I think that there will be kind of a more general or universal way of doing it. It's just a lot of companies are in the thick of it right now, so they're not publishing those results. They're not sharing those learnings yet. And I do think a lot of people will share those. I don't think they'll keep them to themselves, because what I do believe AI has done is it has pulled together a lot of competitors. It's pulled together people from different industries. People want this to work because they understand the benefit that everybody's going to have from it. And so I think people are going to be much more willing to share their viewpoints and their strategies with others compared to historically, where that is just a significant differentiator. I think this is a little bit more of the greater good philosophy from them, where they're going to want to be able to share that pretty publicly.
Yeah. Before we jump to the next question, I wanted to take a pause for a learning moment. First of all, like I really love how you ended, because open innovation was actually the theme as we launch our new season. Like the importance of really going beyond the individual goals of every organization and the collective. But in your first point about like the trends that you're observing, happen and problems that will be solved soon, you mentioned two things that I thought it'd be cool to if we give you the space to maybe simplify and clarify, because I have not heard about large physics models before. So it'd be really cool if you could explain it. And at the same time, you also mentioned synthetic data, which I know it's really important. And there's like whole companies dedicated to it. So could we like take a second and go back to that answer just to have you explain that for us who are not as familiarized with all that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a large physics model essentially would be taking, there are different disciplines within modeling and simulation. So you might have somebody doing finite element analysis. You could have somebody doing crash analysis. You could have somebody doing fluid dynamics. So if you think about it and you're designing, say like a wing of a plane, and typically you're working on that component of an airplane. And so you're determining how the wind flows over things. How does rain go onto it? How do those different things affect it? When you think about that though, that's one component of an entire plane. How do you bring together maybe that along with a crash analysis? So you're doing multi-physics simulation at that point. And so when you bring in all that data, you want to be able to see how do these things interact with each other. So we talked about the industrial metaverse earlier and some of these new elements. How do you actually see a bigger, wider design space, and how do you optimize around it? So basically you can put this in, you can train it, you can put variables against it, and then you understand the result. Well, after that, you want to be able to leverage that for your whole organization. So you want somebody to be able to go in and put their inputs in and then train against that model and have that model continuously, evolve. And then from a synthetic data point, you basically need a lot of data points in order to build a model, right? You have to have a set of data of what is excellent, what is good, what is bad. You need to be able to go through these different elements. And so if you don't have the data set there, or you don't have a historical data set to work off of, you need to be able to build that up. And then, if it's a new product, you don't have all of those other components. You don't have wind tunnel data yet. You don't have IoT data. You don't have all those different data sources that you can go off of. So you basically have to build a virtual or synthetic type of data set where you could say, here is what we believe to be true that we can train off of from here. And so it goes back to that story of like the historical versus future data strategy and how you actually marry those together. And an interim solution in the physics space will be building, synthetic data in order to work off of.
So I feel like I'm getting smarter by the minute just listening to this conversation. And it does bring me back to some of our other episodes, and we're hearing a lot of commonalities throughout, all of the different industries that we're talking to. So I agree with you also on the idea of making it more readily available, the data and the information and the best practices. So I'm really excited to see, what that brings for across all different industries. But before we let you go, and I think you've given some great pieces of advice already today for our partners that might be listening. But if there was one other piece of advice that you might give for other partners and peers, that see potential or have an idea in this particular industry, and what they want to innovate, what is something you might suggest?
Yeah, so there's two pieces of advice, I think, from our experience, at least, that I would give, which is one, meet the customer where they are. Everybody is at a different point in their AI journey, and just their adoption of technology or cloud and so forth. Meet the customer where they are and solve a problem that's solvable. Pick something that you actually can understand how you would go about building a solution. I think oftentimes people try to boil the ocean, and what ends up happening is that everybody fails in that situation. And there's a lot of resources, time, effort that go into that. You want to get some wins together so that way you can learn and you can advance from it. One thing we talk about all the time is you're kind of paying for learnings right now with AI. And that's okay, but at least get something out of it. Understand how it's attached to a business case in that circumstance too, because you need to see a return. It's not good enough just to build an AI application, and then if nobody's going to use it, it's going to be on the shelf. Again, it's really, what was a trade-off there? And then the second piece of advice is understand where you are in the ecosystem. And so to my earlier point where you don't want to boil the ocean, understand what problem you're solving. What are you being a good steward where you can, and then partner where you can't. It is absolutely great to partner. We have an AI suite or library of tools that we partner with other people on that they're experts in. And that's something we're going to continue to do. NVIDIA is a major partner in this of ours, and they're great at so many things. And then there's certain components that we're really good at. So it doesn't always have to be go at it alone. And don't be afraid of competition, because at the end of the day, we're all going to make each other better. And there's a large market for this. So it's okay to compete, but also to partner. It's co-opetition in my mind. And I think that, at the end of the day, that's a good thing. And it's going to only push you forward. They're going to learn from you. You're going to learn from them. And then, we're all going to be able to deliver better products to the market that the greater population gets to take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you pretty much walk the talk, because ever since the first question we asked you, you were talking about this organization's doing that and how you're going about it. So you're definitely, the advice that you're giving explicitly at the end of this conversation, you've sprinkled it throughout your previous answers, Derek. So thank you so much for that wisdom. It was an honor for us to have you here and to learn from you, from large physics models to synthetic data to all the wonderful things that we're doing together with Rescale. It's been amazing to have you here.
Yeah, thank you both very much for having me. This has been excellent.
Thank you. And stay tuned for our next section.
That's right. We now have our manufacturing post game show. After this lovely conversation with Rescale, we now have Rochelle Fleming with us. She is our manufacturing expert in our go to market team. She has over 20 years of experience in marketing. And we're going to pick her brain on what this conversation means for you as our partner. How are you doing today, Rochelle?
I'm doing well. Great to see you both. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And tell us, what did you think about our conversation with Rescale?
I thought it was great. He had so many great points in regard to how and what he's focusing on with customers, specifically on data. Um, his mention of like going, backwards for historical and making sure to have a future data approach. When he mentioned the 100 years of documentation, and that's a real life situation where they're getting asked to how do they approach that with customers. So I thought that was amazing just to be able to go backwards and forward and being able to be flexible there. The other piece was just how Rescale is prioritizing security and just making sure that that is a part of all of their customer conversations. And I loved his last point in regard to know where you're at in the ecosystem and partner where you need to. I think each partner organization has their core competencies of where they're experts. And so knowing when you need to reach out to other organizations to help you, it just makes such a better experience for the customer and more complete. So I just loved his overall philosophy and approach and how he works with customers.
That is absolutely the right approach, Rochelle. We couldn't agree more. And, as we discovered with Derek, the industrial metaverse and what it really takes to get there and all the opportunities from more resilient supply chains, which is something that this industry shares a lot with the retail and CPG industry. And other, concepts like the enablement of intelligent factories. There's just so much opportunity and so much areas that are different. So where do you see the biggest impact?
I think the biggest impact has really been how manufacturers are so focused on resilient supply chain and also the smart factory. I mean, they are making it such a priority as they're thinking about their technology strategy. And they're really trying to understand the specifics around supply chain so that they can ensure that there's a really amazing customer experience and processes are there to help make that happen. And the supply chain is something that all of us have felt at one time or another. Specifically, when we're trying to buy a product, whether it's online or in store, and we go in, or we're online and it says the product isn't available, and we think, well, when will it be available, or do I have to find an alternative? And so, manufacturers are so aware of this situation, and they're trying to think of how they can address it with AI. They're trying to figure out how are they handling situations where they don't have the raw materials or they don't have the labor force or they don't have the shipping and transportation options available to them. And so they're trying to see, working with partner organizations specifically, how can they have the visibility across different systems to really the status of different products in order to avoid disruptions. And how are they able to really take data and have a better forecast so that they are able to fulfill products in warehouses and so forth? So it's very high on their radar. And I also think they're working through the smart factory floor. They're not only using AI, but they're using data analytics, they're using industrial IoT. And they're trying to ensure that when folks are on the factory floor, that they're able to go back to the engineers and the designers and give them updates in real time for what is happening. And they're also trying to figure out, as they're on the floor, like if they have any idea that a product is defective, how they're able to address that very quickly. And also just the communication from frontline workers all on the factory floor, how they're able to collaborate in real time. And so these manufacturing organizations have so much to think about. And these areas specifically around supply chain and smart factory floor, they're making it a priority to see how can they keep getting better and better And partners are helping do that. Different technologies of AI and cloud are helping them do that. So there's so many different pieces to it, but it's definitely top of mind for them as they're figuring out what's next in their strategy.
Yeah, and you just kind of touched on this, right? The interconnection of retail and consumer product goods and the modernization really of the whole customer experience. And you talked a little bit about improving customer satisfaction and loyalty, right? Through better services and better products. For you, what else would you add to that in terms of like what does this innovation in manufacturing mean for the customer really who's at the end of that supply chain?
Yeah, they, meaning manufacturers, are so focused on that high quality product, hitting that bar, and really ensuring that the customer has great experiences, not only with the product, but when they are engaging with the manufacturer directly. And all of this will ladder up to really high customer sat. And so they're looking at ways to ensure that they're always going back to that outcome of having the high customer sat. And how are they having processes and motions in place to help with things like product monitoring? So if they're seeing that there's a need for potentially a product to be replaced or the need for it to be replaced for whatever reason, how do they have proactive comms to a customer? They're also looking at how do they do issue resolution, not only through like remote assistance, but it could be chatbots, it could be self-service tools. And when they do that, how are they able to do that in real time? And ideally trying to just predict and detect and make sure that they're getting in front of any issues that the customer may be experiencing in the future. And so they're really thinking through not only how does it work from just when the customer actually has the product, but beyond, and how the usages of it, their experience, and their connection back to the manufacturer, really making sure that they have an amazing experience with using the product ongoing. And that's just a great experience for the customer and all the other users that they may influence, and repeated business, of course, for that manufacturer. So looking at it all the way from the development to the usage, and then after, to make sure that the customer is satisfied.
I love it, and I feel like in only a few minutes we've covered all the way from like the factory to the post-consumption experience. So Rochelle, what advice do you have for our listeners if they're as excited as Helene and I are at listening to you, and of course to Derek before you? If they wanted to get started in this journey, what would be the one piece of advice or the one go-to resource that you would point them to?
So, if you are a partner today that is focused on manufacturing or are interested in learning more about the manufacturing narrative and stories, I would definitely suggest looking into the industry kits. And think of this as assets that you can use to either, one, learn more about our overall story and different personas or roles that we're having customer conversations with, or use it, if you are in this space, use it as a base when you are meeting with the customer, and add your solution and service information to it. So ideally, it's saving you some time because you're able to leverage the value prop, how you potentially can have different talking points for different roles that you're talking to within manufacturers. So I think it's a great place to look at these assets and ideally leverage it as you're thinking about how do we show up with our customers, and how do I potentially train the sales team so that we're all talking in a similar language, and similar use cases and so forth. So I would say that's a great wealth of information to consider when you're trying to determine your story as you show up to customers.
That's awesome. And some of our other Microsoft industry experts shared the same bit of advice. So I highly suggest that you go and check those amazing industry kits out. And we will put, of course, the link to those kits with the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us today, Rochelle, and for bringing one of our great partners in the manufacturing space, Rescale. We really, truly appreciate you being here today.
Oh, thank you both. Thanks, Helene. Thanks, Fede. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
If you're as excited as we are about all these industry stories that we've shared, there's great news because there's more coming up in a couple of weeks. Stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you want to join the conversation, make sure to check our LinkedIn America's Partner community. Use the hashtag #NoSlides attached. We'd love to see what you think so far. We hope today's conversations have ignited fresh perspectives and inspired you to take new opportunities in this changing landscape of AI.
Stay tuned for more insights and stories on No Slides Attached. Be sure to listen in and follow us at noslidesAttached.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts.